Hi Chefeteers, I'm Chef Nakia and I want you to be more confident in the kitchen. And in today's video, I'm gonna share with you what I would consider more of like an intermediate cooking advice. So if you feel like you're past the beginner stages of learning to cook and becoming confident in your kitchen, if you have a pretty good meal planning routine down, you have several meals and recipes that you feel really confident cooking, and you're very comfortable with your kitchen equipment, and you have a nice little kitty who wants to come sit on your lap, but you still at times find yourself scrambling to finish this one last part of the meal because everything else is ready, but just this one last thing, your timing is a little bit off, then this video is for you. Today we're going to talk about the flow of cooking and how to schedule your time in the kitchen so that your meal comes together all at the same time and you are ready to like serve and eat that meal when everything is at its absolute peak. And schedule sounds very like regimented. That's not what this is meant to be. It's really just about thinking through the tasks that you need to do and making them all like fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. It's definitely not something that you need to dedicate a lot of time or thought to or like add it in as a whole nother step to your meal planning process. It's really just a little shuffle of tasks, and by taking a couple seconds, like 30 seconds or less beforehand to think through what you're about to cook, you're gonna be able to enjoy that time in the kitchen because you won't be standing around twiddling your thumbs just waiting for something to get done, and you also won't feel like you're trying to hurry or rush any part of your cooking tasks. Once you are familiar with some like reference information that I'll share with you later on in the video, like typically how long things need to cook and stuff. Once you get really comfortable with that kind of timing, then something like this is going to become so second nature to you. You're gonna realize that you are planning these things out without really even thinking about it. All right, so there are 3 main questions that you need to ask yourself before you actually start cooking to make sure that as you are about to prepare this meal, your timing is going to be spot on. So the first question is, what portion of this meal is going to take the longest to cook? Cook and or prepare. I typically like to say cook because whenever we're thinking about aspects of the meal being ready at the same time, you want things like hot and fresh. So I'm going to use cook most of the time. If you are preparing something where like preparing is the verb that makes the most sense for you, then just interchange that in there. But whenever we're thinking about what's going to take the longest amount of time to cook, most of the time it's going to be either our protein or our starch. Personally, I like my roasted potatoes to be pretty crispy on the outside, so I like to roast those for like 45 minutes. And then kind of some follow-up questions to, okay, what component of the meal is going to take the longest to cook is, does that component need to be cooked in the oven or the grill? So do you need to preheat your oven or your grill, or do you need to like get some water on a pot, warming up on the stove and getting that water up to a boil in order to start cooking your component? And then your second question is going to be, okay, what are the additional components that are going to be cooked and what order will those go in? Are they going to be very similar in cook time? Are they going to be dramatically different? And make sure that whatever is going to be the quickest to cook is the last thing to meet the heat. And the third and final major question is about your mise en place. So mise en place means everything in its place. It's kind of kitchen shorthand of saying, make sure that all of your components of your dish that need to be peeled or diced, washed, prepped in any sort of way, that work is already done before you actually start to cook it. And so you want, let's say you're gonna saute some onion and garlic, you wanna make sure that your onion and garlic are prepped, sitting either on a cutting board or in a bowl, ready to go before the oil in your pan is hot enough that you need to add it. So this question about mise en place really boils down to, do you need to have everything mise en place, washed, sliced, peeled, diced, whatever it may be, before you even start cooking anything? Or are the cooking tasks going to take a long enough time that there will be inactive time within there that it makes sense for you to fill that inactive time with slicing and dicing your veggies, for example, during the time that maybe your chicken breast is in the oven cooking. Just with those 3 questions, I'm sure that you can already see the framework and the scaffolding of our process of what are we going to focus on first, second, third, fourth, and fifth, right? So first would be preparing whatever the longest component is going to be, the longest cooking component is going to be. And then we're gonna make sure that steps 2 through 5 are filled in with whatever additional cooking is required. The mise en place for the vegetables are going to be slotted into one of those structure points, let's call it, where there is a window of time when you don't need to be actively monitoring something that is cooking. So if you are going to be cooking those vegetables, make sure that that chunk of mise en place time is ahead of when those vegetables need to start cooking, and that you have plenty of time. Like, be realistic about how long it will take you to chop the things that need to be chopped. So those are the main 3 questions, and I have a couple other small, like, nice to know sort of questions that you can ask yourself as well. As you're thinking about what all it takes to prepare this meal, are there any instructions within that recipe or any of those recipes that are mid-process, but they take a fair amount of time to do? For example, I find a lot of times like cracking and whisking eggs can be a task that once I'm in the flow of a recipe, sometimes it takes me a little bit longer to do than what I want, like what I was really anticipating. So oftentimes, if a recipe needs cracked, whisked eggs, I will go ahead and just do that before I even start cooking anything. Another example of this would be like zesting and juicing citrus. A lot of times that really won't take very long at all, but if a recipe would call for the juice of 2 or 3 or 4 oranges or limes or something like that, then that time is really going to add up. So that's another example of something that I would maybe want to kind of pick out and go ahead and put to the top of the list of tasks. That way you can just get them done and out of the way. The next bonus question is to think about if any of your cooked components are things that are gonna be totally fine just sitting after they're cooked. For example, rice. I find that I can get my rice on the stove going, it's nice and steaming. Even after it's absorbed all of the water, I can just turn off the heat. If I'm using like an electric stove where the burner is still gonna hold a fair amount of heat, I would move it off of that burner, but like on this gas stove here, I can just leave it right there. I just turn off the heat, and then that rice can sit there for like 10 minutes, and it still just has the steam because I've kept the lid on it, and so it's just as delicious 10 minutes after it's done cooking as like the minute that it is done cooking. So there are a lot of starchy type foods like your rice and your couscous and farro and things like that that definitely fall into this category of it can be finished cooking and it can wait for you and the quality is still going to be great. And then the last little thing that you might want to consider is pulling out any of your herbs or spices from the pantry, or like even oils or vinegars, or like stocks, soy sauce, tamari, any of those types of things like from the fridge, and just have them on the counter. If you have enough counter space to do this, have them on the counter waiting for you, and that way once you get to a point where you need to season something, everything is just right there, easy for you to grab, and you don't have to walk back and forth to the pantry to get those. All right, so all of this is great, but what if you're sitting there thinking, well, I don't really know how long it's gonna take me to cook my ground beef, right? Maybe you cook ground beef a fair amount, but you've never really thought about how long it takes. I'm gonna share with you some pretty vague ideas of cooking times that you can start to pair with some different proteins, starches, and vegetables. Of course, this is going to be the most accurate for high altitude temperatures. So low altitude, you might be able to cook these things a little bit faster. If you want to learn more about high altitude cooking versus like sea level cooking, I have a video, at least one, maybe two, I don't know, whatever's linked around. You can go find out more about high altitude cooking and how it's a little bit different. Also, there's a lot of personal preference that goes into how long you want to cook something. There's definitely the safe internal cooking temperatures for any sort of animal protein. But if it's not just the safe internal temperature that you are aiming for, if you are, for example, trying to cook your ribeye to a medium rare versus a well done, well, those are definitely going to take different cooking times. So that's why I say these are going to be windows of recommended-ish cooking times for things. Vegetables are another one that are going to be very dependent on what your preference is for like the style that you cook the vegetables, and also how cooked or more like fresh you like your vegetables to be prepared. As you're cooking, you might pay a little bit more attention to about how long this ingredient tends to take for you to cook it the way that you like to cook it. And then you can just build on that knowledge to make your cooking flow work the best for you and, you know, your preferred cooking methods. For cooking proteins, I'm going to start with the proteins that will cook the quickest: tilapia and pollock, rainbow trout, you know, those really thin, more delicate. I would recommend cooking these on the stovetop, whether you're like pan frying them or poaching them. You can put them in the oven, but they're gonna cook pretty quickly, like 5 to 7 minutes. So I feel like in the oven, they can get overcooked pretty quickly. That's why I like doing them on the stovetop, because I can keep a closer eye on them. So let's say we're pan frying it, we can put that in the pan, about 2 to 3 minutes later, flip it, and then see how it's going, probably take it off in another 2 minutes or so. Poaching will also be about that 8-ish minute time frame. So that's about the quickest any of our proteins are going to cook. Now, staying in the fish category, but looking at a little bit of a meatier fish, like a catfish or a cod, shrimp, you can just add another minute or two onto this cook time, of course depending on exactly how thick that fillet is. Your ocean fish, so like salmon and steelhead trout, thicker fish, then 10 to 12-ish minutes. All right, and then moving into poultry, so like chicken and turkey. For chicken, I will say there's gonna be a big cooking time difference between cooking a full breast of chicken that hasn't been butterflied versus like chicken breast tenders or something like that. So for the most part, I would recommend either getting chicken breast tenders or butterflying your chicken breast so that it's going to cook a little bit quicker and definitely more evenly. You know, 12 to 15 minutes or so on the stove or grill. In the oven, you're gonna be looking at more like 20-25 minutes, just depending on how much space you have around the chicken. If you are doing like chicken drumsticks, or even like a full-on chicken, then of course your cook time is going to go up significantly. I mean, a whole chicken in the oven is gonna be a couple hours. A whole turkey in the oven, as you know from Thanksgiving, is gonna be many hours, like 5-6 hours. So those types of preparations, I would say, kind of take us out of this framework altogether, because if you are cooking something for 6 hours, you're kind of in a whole different ballpark of like trying to find a flow in the kitchen. I'm gonna focus on more like protein cooking for what I would say an average dinner might be. Pork, lamb, and beef are all going to very much depend on the cut of that meat that you are cooking. Any of your larger cuts of meat, any tougher cuts of meat, or cuts of meat that have more connective tissue, you're going to want to do lower and slower. And so this is where you could end up with a pork shoulder in the crock pot for like 8 hours. So again, that's a little bit of a different beast. If you are doing like pork tenderloin, lamb chops, a sirloin steak, those types of cuts of meat, you're gonna be looking at 15 to 20-ish minutes, depending on the thickness and depending on your preference of rare, medium well, or well done. And then some other proteins, duck, bison, venison, those kinds of things. A lot of times lower and slower is gonna be better for those because they are gamier, they can tend to be tougher. I also find that people who like to cook those types of proteins, a lot of times are doing that from some sort of like handed down family recipe or way. And so I think you are probably gonna have more expertise on how long that specific thing takes for you to cook. So for the most part, if we're thinking about the proteins that we're going to be cooking for your average dinner, we're probably looking at somewhere between like 7 or 8 minutes up to maybe 20 minutes on the higher end. For starches, I have included potatoes here. I've also included them in the vegetable section, so call it what you want. As I mentioned before, I do personally prefer to roast my potatoes so that they are pretty crispy on the outside. So for me, potatoes, like roasted potatoes, are gonna be one of the components that I cook for the longest amount of time. If you don't like the exterior of your potato to be very crispy, you can probably get away with only roasting it for 25-30 minutes. I like 45 minutes. And then for mashed potatoes, you're gonna want those to boil for 15 or so minutes before you drain them, and then go ahead and mix them up. Some other starches, and I'll mostly do these from like quickest, again, to the ones that will take the longest. Couscous is one of your quickest to cook grains. Here is like the tiny little couscous. You simmer the water, and then you put the couscous in and you turn the heat off, and then you fluff it like 5 minutes later. So little couscous like this can be as quick as like 5 minutes. Your pearl couscous is gonna be more like 15 minutes. Bulgur, this is prepared a little similarly to the couscous, about 12 minutes from when you add the grain into the water. Don't forget to include the time it takes for your water to get up to a simmering and or boiling point. And depending on your cookware, your stove, the temperature of your water that you already have, and of course if you are at altitude or not, your water is going to boil more quickly or less quickly to cook that bulgur. And then farro is going to be a little bit longer, more like 15 to 18, maybe even 20 minutes. I do feel like for me here in Colorado, farro is closer to 20 minutes typically. That's about what I cook rice for, also 20, maybe 25 minutes for like a brown rice. But your like Thai jasmine rice, basmati rice, those I will typically do closer to the 20-minute mark. Quinoa is also right there around 20 minutes. And our last starch to talk about is pasta. And pasta is going to have a wide range of cooking times. So if we start with little like orzo pastas, these tiny little guys, they take me less than 10 minutes. And if you have something like an angel hair pasta or a thin spaghetti, that's again gonna be right about 10, maybe up to 12 minutes. Your ditalini, these are a little bigger than the orzo, but they'll take 10 to 12 minutes. And then something like an elbow macaroni is a little bit bigger than your ditalini, so 13, 14-ish minutes. Spaghetti, about 15 minutes. Something like a linguine, I'd plan for that to be more like 18 minutes. Have like this penne here, it's like 15, 16 minutes. I would plan for rotini, or maybe are gonna be fairly similar to the penne, maybe add a minute on. And then your like rigatoni, your really large noodles, you might be looking at 20 up to almost 25 minutes. Pasta does have a little bit of a preference built in. Like personally, I do prefer my pasta to be a little al dente, like have still a little bit of a bite in it. But even the time difference between that and like something that's like really mushy and like definitely overcooked. Everybody would say, this is overcooked, this isn't great pasta. You've only got a couple minutes of range there. So for vegetables, this is definitely the group that is going to have the biggest variance in the method that you cook it and for the amount of time that you want to cook it based off of your personal preferences. I have grouped the vegetables into kind of categories based off of how long they'll cook, and these are not like super scientifically based categories. Like you will, if you know the genetic makeup of vegetables and who's closer to who, you're gonna see some miscategorization, but I tried to categorize these in some layman's terms acceptable categories, and really based off of mostly how long I might cook them if I'm going to cook them. I'm gonna go from longest to quickest, mostly because as we get closer to the end, these are gonna be the vegetables that I use raw just as often as I use cooked. Okay, so we will start with tubers. So this would be like potatoes, sweet potatoes, yams, yucca, or cassava. These will cook the longest. If you just wrap them in aluminum foil and bake them, could be an hour, hour and a half. A lot of times for these, I will prefer to peel it, dice it, season it, and roast it for, like I said, like 30 to 40 to 45 minutes. The next category would be root vegetables, so like carrots, turnips, radishes. So in the oven for like 25. Yes, depending on how large or small you cut these root vegetables, it will have a huge impact onto how long they cook. If you are making a soup, right, and you have a mirepoix, you have onion, carrot, and celery, on the stove top you're sauteing it, that carrot is not going to cook for 25 minutes in that step, right? You are going to saute those for like 5 minutes maybe. So this is where I say there's going to be a ton of variation here. Our next group are like cruciferous or brassicas veggies, so like your cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, broccoli. If I'm roasting these in the oven, we're looking at closer to like 15 minutes, maybe up to 20 minutes. Next we have bulb veggies, so onions, leeks, fennel, that kind of stuff. If I'm roasting these in the oven, 15-ish minutes. Next, let's talk about gourds. So these would be like cucumbers, zucchini, summer squash, winter squash, pumpkin, that kind of stuff. Now I will say that the same size of zucchini and pumpkin are not, I wouldn't consider those cooked and ready to eat at the same time. So your winter gourds, I would add like 50% of cook time onto those as what you are doing your summer squash. So your zucchini and summer squash type veggies, roasting in the oven 10, 12 minutes. So your winter ones would be more like 20 minutes. Next we can talk about legumes. Although I almost put this in protein, it wouldn't be an animal-based protein, and I kind of kept all of them different types of animal proteins. So legumes are like lentils, beans, snap peas, like sugar snap peas or green beans, stuff like that. So your sugar snap peas and your green beans, if those are roasting in the oven, I'd keep it to like 10 to 12 minutes. Beans, like dried beans, are gonna take so long on the stove. So I know a lot of families who will just buy canned beans. So a lot of times I find that if people are cooking with beans, they're not even going through the whole process of simmering them on the stove. But like lentils or these little red lentils, this is something that you would maybe cook on the stove a little more similarly to starch. I'm gonna go with the nightshade family for this one. So this is going to include tomatoes and peppers and eggplant. As you can see, we're moving even more into the types of veggies that I might not even cook at all, especially like the peppers and the tomatoes. If you are roasting peppers along with, squash and eggplant and everything like that, they're gonna cook fairly similarly. All right, and then lastly, we have leafy greens. Most leafy greens I'm not going to cook very often. Something like spinach though, I would cook. I wouldn't ever really roast that in the oven though. If I'm gonna cook that, I'm probably going to steam it or just like saute it in with other ingredients. And this is where we come to with our veggies, is there are so many different ways to cook and incorporate vegetables in our meals. And so often we are cooking them as a part of a larger meal where like there's a pretty defined space where they go in. So for example, if you are cooking a pasta dish, let's say that we're going to make chicken with a white wine lemon butter sauce on some thin spaghetti. Let's say we have some zucchini, bell pepper, and sugar snap peas. The way that we're gonna put this together, the way that I would choose to put this together is the first thing I would do is I would take chicken breast tenders out of the fridge and just, keep them in their package on the countertop for a few minutes so that they can not be so cold. I don't like shocking really cold meat onto the heat right away. So while those are sitting on the counter, I'm gonna fill a pot with water for the pasta and get that on the stove over medium-high heat so it can start to come up to a boil. Then I can go ahead and get my veggies out of the fridge and wash those. Now, once the veggies are washed, I know that it's not gonna take me that long to break these down, like dice them, slice and dice them. So after my veggies are washed, I can go ahead and start heating up the pan that I'm gonna cook the chicken breast tenderloins in, and then I'll get all of the seasonings that I'm gonna wanna use tonight out and drizzle the pan with some oil, season the chicken breast, and then I can add that to the pan. Those are gonna take 8 to 10 minutes to cook. So I'm gonna do 4 minutes and then flip them and do 4 more minutes and then double check that it's an internal temperature of at least 165 degrees. So during that 8-ish minutes that the chicken is cooking, that's whenever I can go and I can slice my bell pepper, slice my zucchini. I don't really need to slice the peas very much. I can kind of just like cut those in half or thirds depending on how big they are. So by the time I'm done cutting the veggies, my pasta water should be at a boil, ready to add the pasta in. So I'm gonna salt that water and then add the pasta in. That's gonna take, what did we say, 10-ish? Maybe a little more than 10 minutes to cook. And so during that time, I can check my chicken. It'll probably be done cooking. Once the chicken is done cooking, I'm gonna wanna use the same pan to saute the veggies and make my sauce in it. So I'm gonna remove the chicken, I'm gonna drizzle a little bit more oil in the pan, and then I'm gonna go ahead and add my veggies in at that point. And then because it's not using very much lemon, I'm not gonna worry about zesting and juicing my lemon ahead of time. I'm just gonna have that close by the stove. I'm gonna use a fairly high heat here for the veggies to get a little bit of color on the outside. That's just how I prefer these veggies. Have a pretty fresh texture. They're definitely not going to be like cooked so much that they're mushy. So once the veggies have a little bit of color on them, now I'm gonna take those out of the pan. We're gonna pour our white wine into that pan, and that's gonna help encourage, and the quick simmering of that wine is going to encourage all those yummy food bits to come up off of the bottom. So we're gonna kind of be scraping with a wooden spoon the bottom of this pan to get it all worked in together. Now I can go ahead and add my butter to the pan, and I'm just gonna kind of let that melt while I check my pasta. It should be about ready. We can go ahead and zest some of our lemon onto that sauce, and then cut the lemon in half and add the juice of about half of a lemon. And so now your sauce is basically ready to go. In the meantime, I'm gonna drain the pasta, and I'm gonna make sure to leave a little bit of pasta sauce in the bottom. Alternatively, if you are afraid you're gonna forget, you could totally just like put a little extra splash of, you could put a bit of a splash of water into the saucepan right now. And then I'm gonna pour that sauce over the pasta and, mix it all together with a spoon. Don't try to mush mix it, but almost like more of a folding motion. All ready to go. At the same time, you're ready to sit down and enjoy a delicious meal. If, for example, you wanted to serve a salad with this also, then you can just prep that entire salad before you even start cooking anything. I hope that this example helped you visualize what I was explaining with shuffling the tasks and getting it all to fit together like a nice puzzle. Like I said at the beginning, this is more of like an intermediate cooking skill, and this will just help you be able to enjoy your time in the kitchen so much more. If you don't feel stressed or like you're rushing to get something done, if you just feel like everything is almost like a choreographed dance and you're doing this and next you're doing that, and just really moving your way through the kitchen so that you feel prepared for the food whenever it's ready, and you also feel like the food is ready for you whenever you're ready for it to move on to its next step, right? Like getting into that nice flow of things is going to bring you so much more joy and confidence in the kitchen. If you would like to see any additional like examples of how this works or anything, let me know. If there are any other cooking advice, cooking tips and tricks that you want to learn from me, let me know about that. Thank you so much, Chef Fatiers. I hope that you cook something really delicious soon.